Can everybody hear me okay? Is this scary microphone setup working? Can you hear me okay? Good. I know it's a late afternoon. It's kind of that time where the long talks are setting in and everybody's a little sleepy. So I promise by the end of this, we'll move around a little bit. You can take a nap now, but we'll get to that. So, as Matt said, my name's Owen Edwards, and I am an accessibility consultant at SSB Bart Group. And I'm going to talk about things more than just captions. When we talk about accessibility of video, we often think that it's just, let's put captions on and we're good to go. And captions are obviously important, but there's more to it than that, and there's more coming, particularly because of legislation, and that's where I'll touch on. So I'll go over some legislation that's relevant to video. I'll go over some accessibility areas, and then maybe we'll get to move around a little bit at the end. Just a little bit about SSB Bart Group, because most people in the video space haven't heard of us. We're an accessibility consulting company. Our head office is in DC. We're here in San Francisco as well. And we work in the space of working with large, typically Fortune 500 companies around accessibility of their digital products. What we've seen over the last several years is the impact of the existing disability legislation. Most people are aware of the ADA, Americans With Disabilities Act. It was passed in 1990, and pretty much every time you go to a building, you see the effect of ADA. You see a wheelchair ramp or this high contrast and braille signage. And this is how the built environment has been made accessible to people with disabilities. Over the last couple of years, you'll notice that I've highlighted some particular areas here that are relevant, covered within ADA. There's employment, public entities, places of public accommodation, and telecommunications. And when it says accommodation, it's more than places you can sleep. It's any kind of public accommodation, so a store that sells something, that provides a service. The Department of Justice has started to assert that this applies to online presence as well. And this has been a huge shift. A number of companies that may be here, including large streaming companies, may have run into some of these regulations just recently. And it's shifting the legal landscape in terms of what needs to be done with video. A couple of other regulations that are important. You may have heard of Section 508. Section 508 is about federal government accessibility, so anything that's sold to the federal government in terms of communication technology needs to be accessible. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail. The other term that we need to know as we move forward is this Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. W3C standard that is now very broadly used, very broadly understood outside the US as well as inside the US, and where the Department of Justice has started to apply those ADA regulations in the digital space. They've said that the WCAG 2.0 level AA is the standard that they're looking for. This is the standard that they're going to use broadly. So we kind of need to know what that means. And there's 4 principles in WCAG 2.0, 4 key guiding principles as we look at people with disabilities. Features of the internet or features of digital technology that they use should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. What do those mean? Well, perceivable, you should be able to understand that it's there. If you're blind, you should be able to perceive that it's there. You should be able to operate the controls. You should be able to fill in a form and submit that form. You should be able to understand what you're doing. The robust part is that you should be able to interact with it with whatever device you choose to use. That might just be a regular browser, or it might be some assistive technology that adds onto that browser. As I mentioned, there are 3 conformance levels. I'm not sure if they just couldn't decide whether to go with 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, and C. So they went A, AA, AAA. I don't know. That's the way it worked out. And then this other law, CVAA, which came in a few years ago and has been rolling out over the years, gave the FCC a mandate to move new regulations, move forward with regulating access to communications, so access to the phone network for emergency phone calls, things like texting for emergency phone calls, and then also to video programming. They changed some of the definition of video programming to include IP broadcasting as well as over-the-air and cable broadcasting. They looked at captions, they looked at video description, and they looked at emergency information. So captions. Gosh, do you guys work on any caption formats other than these ones? I think I heard the guys at Crunchyroll use, what do they use? Advanced Substation Alpha. Yeah. Right, right. Okay, okay. Does anybody know what all these different things stand for? Are you guys very familiar with this? I see some heads nodding. What's the difference between these? Anybody? They're just ones you have to support. Some are XML, some are complicated. There's no one-to-one mapping between anything. It's a tough area, right? And then there are all these profiles. Well, CVAA specified this SMPTE time text format as a specific format that broadcasters can use that protects them when they have to produce captioning and transfer that to other people. This is the format that's specified within CVAA. It's really the only part of CVAA that has technical laws set out, certainly the only part around video. And that has a big impact for those content producers and distributors. But this WebVTT standard is the standard that's really growing for web content. HTML5, Video.js, we've been working on it, great support for it. And there's all the features in it that you need to get down into. I'm not going to go into the depth of that right here, but there are certainly a lot of features, regions, roll-up, vertical text, right-to-left text, all of those issues that you run into, conversion issues, and then user control over it, a relatively new thing, the user's ability to control what color is the font, what size is the font, what's the background of the font. Has anybody seen this demo, This is Coffee demo? It's a time text demo, all sorts of crazy colors and stuff going on and just showing what was possible. But this idea of being able to change the color of the font or the size of the font is really critical as we now move forward into trying to make things more and more accessible. Because we're starting to think about people who are affected by not just a single disability, but a disability and perhaps something that's related to aging. In the whole area, when we talk about disability, we tend not to think of the effects on your eyesight, your hearing, or your movement related to having a disability. Related to aging. But that's an issue. And in fact, a lot of the areas that are covered by WCAG, in terms of what kind of disabilities, and there are kind of broad categories with WCAG. There is hearing loss, vision loss or vision limitations, including color vision issues, movement issues, motor issues, the ability to use a mouse, and then some cognitive issues and things like epilepsy, ADHD, those areas are all covered. But as I say, a lot of those issues, a lot of those vision loss issues, hearing issues also map into issues that come with aging. So they may not be covered in WCAG, they may not be specified by a company because of that. They may be a concern because of aging, because of trying to appeal to an aging population. So I put in my title for this presentation, why can't we just turn on the auto-captions? And I think we've all seen some examples of auto-captions where they don't work exactly as you'd expect. Right here, I don't know how well it's coming out on the screen, John Oliver is saying, peephole hiked taxes and they hiked the IRS. I think, is Phil around? If he could say that, I think it sounded a lot like John Oliver. People hike taxes and they hike the IRS. I don't quite have his accent down, but I can see where they went there. I can see. But in terms of compatibility with what CVAA requires, this is a problem with the auto-captioning area. It's certainly an area that there's a lot of development going on with, and Google do a fantastic job given the limitations that exist. There are other companies doing great work, but really the best way to get great captions is manually at this point. And the CVAA regulation, more based on that, FCC put in measurements of what needs to be, of what quality is in captioning. So completeness, placement, accuracy, and timing. A big one with placement is not positioning it over existing text in the video. As far as WCAG goes, so WCAG affects you when you're looking at a company as opposed to a broadcast situation. If you're a bank that's putting up a website and wants to have a bunch of videos on it, WCAG is going to become important because of what I mentioned about ADA. That's more subjective. In fact, WCAG specifically states, for example, captions are not needed when synchronized media is itself an alternative presentation of the information that's already presented in text on a page. It's one thing to really bear in mind when you hear about WCAG, when you talk about WCAG is a standard for pages and websites. It's not a standard for components in and of themselves. So a video player on a website, if it has issues that block accessibility, then it blocks WCAG compliance. But if it doesn't have any issues, it isn't really WCAG compliant. It's the page or the site that it's in that becomes compliant. A number of organizations have their own subjective or requirements for captioning quality. Government organizations, health organizations might have specific requirements, and a lot of the vendors have requirements that they will meet. Just going to link out to the video that I have here. So now I need to move it onto that screen. There we go. Is that working? So we've talked about subtitles, so we touched on subtitles and captions. Does anybody know the difference between subtitles and captions? What's the difference?
Captions, a description of the actual sounds that are happening, whereas subtitles are just the text.
Right. Right. You're absolutely right, as long as you're in this country. In the UK, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, it's all subtitles, and then there's subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, which are what you're describing as captions. So the terminology is different in different countries, and it's useful to know that, but generally in the US, that's right, that closed captions can contain more information than subtitles. Typically, subtitles are often thought of as translating to a different language, and that subtitles provide accessibility for people with disabilities. What disability do any of you guys have?
ADHD, woo!
Love it. Not what I'm looking for, but can't read sign language. It's not a disability, right? It's not what we would call a disability, and yet here we have captions which will allow us to read subtitles or to read sign language. So, yeah, that's a reason that accessibility is always more than accessibility. The reason that most people know about captions or subtitles is from sports bars, airports, and gyms, where the TVs have those turned on and the volume turned down. We use it every day. Accessibility is a feature that a lot of us use every day. So, yeah, maybe I could learn sign this way. And there are plenty of people who watch YouTube videos to learn other languages. So, boy, it's really hard to see the screen on this 3-inch monitor. Okay. So, we've heard about captions. Now, description. Most people haven't heard of description. Has anybody heard of video description, audio description? Some of you have. Great. It's relatively unknown right now. It was introduced in the US quite a few years ago and standardized about 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago. The FCC tried to bring it in. There was some pushback from the industry, And CVAA has pushed it back out that there's requirements on broadcasters to add information. Now, conceptually, if you think of captions as taking the audio information and turning it into something visual, for blind people, you want to do the opposite. You want to take the visual information and put it in their ears, right? We just want an audio representation of it. The only thing is, there's a lot of video, right? There's a lot of picture going on. Do you want to talk about every sign in the background? Do you want to talk about the color of each person's shirt? No. So audio narration that's added, or audio description, is added in a way that describes key features. And again, I'm going to pull up a video here for those of you that haven't seen it. Okay, so close your eyes for a second. Imagine you are blind or low vision. It's not much of an experience. In fact, if it was silent at the beginning of this clip, you wouldn't know how long the buffering was going on for, right? Whereas, same clip.
A man sits alone in a hospital waiting room. The scene around him blurs. The distortion appears to show a woman on a bus at night.
You get a better idea of what's going on. And it seems pretty simple, right? It's just an extra narrator talking within the timeline, talking within the audio. And that's typically how it's produced right now. It's a complicated process. There are a number of companies that create description, that sit down with the movie, they walk through it and script it, they voice it, they edit it down to fit in the time. And it's a complicated process, but they create this incredible product. The question is then how you distribute it. So there's a couple of different ways, and right now, for systems that haven't really built out a lot of support for this, it's often done like open captions used to be done, where they were burnt into the film. This is open description. It's distributed a version of the film with the description burnt into it. On YouTube here, there are two different versions of it, one with description and one without, just because there isn't a way to switch between those two easily. But why not? Why couldn't you just have two audio channels? It's just like a director's commentary, right? Very easily switch between those two, and a number of people are starting to support it that way, to think of it as just another audio track. Within HTML5, the support for that is growing, is better spec'd, but it's an area where the user interface needs some work. The ability to switch between those, and particularly the ability to set a preference and say, hey, I'm blind or I'm low vision, I want to watch this film, I want descriptions turned on automatically, they're there. What's also happened, and we have had some discussion about this yesterday at the FOAMS workshop. Sorry, I need to pull this back down. Where'd you go? Oh, here we go. So there's been a lot of work around the idea of, rather than using audio, or rather than using pre-recorded audio, of using text. The same text tracks that are used for captions and subtitles as the description. The HTML5 standard supports a track kind of description, exactly the same as captions, and nobody supports that right now. There's no support for it out into the browsers or out into the players. It's a really nice thought. It needs building out. Google did a demo of it. I think it's 4 years ago. Sylvia was involved with that, of what it could look like. And the question is, are you going to use the browser to do that conversion of text into speech? And what are the issues around synchronization? What are the issues about mixing it? Level-wise, do you need to control the level of the two different audios independently? And then what happens if you overrun the gap that's available for you to speak into? Typically that description is put into a time frame, into a part of the soundtrack where there's no speech and no significant audio. What happens if it takes too long to read it out? What are you going to do? So you get into this idea of extended playback. Extended playback is when your descriptions intentionally stop the video. They pause the video, it extends the time of the video by playing that description and then resuming playback of the video. It's hard to synchronize that up, particularly in the case where you're using a screen reader. So typically blind users. Does anybody know much about screen readers for computers? Anybody used one? Not many. If you have a Mac, you have one already. For Windows, they are either expensive, which is JAWS, which is the most common one, or NVDA, which is free. You can download it and try that out. But the Mac has it built right in. It's just Command F5.
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen and can be used to control the computer using only your keyboard.
There you go. So you've all got that. If you have a Mac, play with it, try it out. It means you can navigate around the screen without using the trackpad or mouse. And you'll get some experience of what blind folks experience while they're moving around that screen. But I mentioned about extended description. So if you use the screen reader to read out that text, most blind people set the speed of reading to their preference, and it's typically incredibly fast. If you hear it, it's like that bit at the end of the ad where they say the legal disclaimer that you're not meant to really understand. If you stand next to a blind person that typically uses one of these, they run it very fast, which is great. But if they happen to slow it down for some need, what happens when it runs into the dialogue in the film? So there are various techniques that were built into WebVTT with the idea of allowing this extended pause mechanism. And it doesn't work very well with a screen reader. That connection is difficult. Extended description in and of itself is only required at level AAA in WCAG, and really level AAA are nice to have features. Very few people are going to go to level AAA. But there are some interesting situations. I'll give you, again, another example of a video, again from Britain. For some reason, all my videos are from Britain. Where am I? Okay. So this is a project called Cities Unlocked. They produced, as I mentioned, just two totally separate videos, one that has the description and one that doesn't. I'm going to play it, and the audio on the one with the description is turned up. Buffering. Isn't this the point where Steve Jobs said, everybody turn your Wi-Fi off? Yep. Really?
Visual impaired people, everyone is an individual. So to talk about
Come
the
on.
challenges and the barriers that they
Am I reloading that? Let's try that one more time.
Presenters required to use VideoJS?
Yes.
What's that? Absolutely. That was the memo I got.
Just pausing it now and then when they finish buffering, it's Sarah's fault.
Yeah.
Well, this is being served by YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. What?
All right.
I get to make fun. You guys are both of us.
Well, in the interest of time, what? Oh, it's kind of. There we go.
Visual impairred people, everyone is an individual. So to talk about the challenges and the barriers that they face when getting out and about or on their own terms. Visual impaired people.
What's going on? It's a totally different cut. They cut the segments totally different so that they could fit in that description because there wasn't enough space. How are you going to broadcast that? how are you going to, I mean, it's fine if it's just two separate videos, but if you want to have an on-off button that allows you to turn on and off the description, you need to know how those two sync up. And that technology isn't in place anywhere yet. So I just want to give that as an example of how extended description was used here, not because, oh, it's a nice fancy feature, but because it solves the problem. And that's very much what WCAG is looking at, is what solves the problem. I mentioned some assistive technology, so specifically screen readers are there, but also screen magnification, high contrast mode, speech input. What we'll all run into as video becomes required to be accessible is that the controls need to be accessible. The buttons, the menus, anything that's a control. And there are some issues around that. WCAG has specifications. If you're building your own controls that aren't part of the browser, you need to be sure that you're using ARIA markup, that you're using JavaScript to support keyboard access. Otherwise, they won't pass the WCAG requirements. Okay, I'm going to skip through transcripts because I just got there. A couple of other things that are coming up again, AAA requirements probably won't come in. Sign language as a supplementary video. But really what I want to leave you guys with, and who here watches videos? Why? Yeah, we could be here all day for so many reasons. To learn stuff. Anybody watching to learn stuff? Entertainment. Have something to talk to the next day at school, work, wherever you go. For all sorts of reasons. Does anybody snowboard? Stand up if you snowboard. Now stand up if you want to snowboard. Okay. Where? Does it work? You know the video isn't going to work at this point, right? Hold on. Awkward. What's the easiest way to do this, Phil? Any ideas? It's on here, but I guess it didn't get embedded in there.
Okay. We can.
We just plug it in?
Yeah, just plug it in. Cool. Whoop. Yeah, that was a good sound.
Yep.
Sure, it's fine.
I've had worse.
Your HDMI is on the
On
inside.
this side.
You have a.
Nope, keep standing. Really, this is just who's falling asleep yet? Like, has anybody fallen asleep? We
Just
connected?
switch the resolution to 720, otherwise it'll overscan the thing.
Wow. Those colours look great.
Ooh. That's green. Give it a minute. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Oh.
Good enough? Great. So a lot of people say, do blind people want to watch video? Well, why not? It doesn't need to be that loud. This is how I learned about working with blind people. David Hunter has been blind since birth, and he snowboards somewhat better than I do. Why? Because he wanted to. If you enjoy watching a video, why wouldn't a blind guy want to watch it? You might not get 100% out of it. You might not if you've got your phone out. But we can put that technology in place that allows people with disabilities to dream. Okay. That's my time.